My name is Luisa Edves. I'm the Director of Education and International Development at British Expertise International. We are a membership organization which supports UK companies to expand in international businesses and markets. So what we do is we connect our members to either ministries, donors, foundations, and trying to make the world a better place. And I will let you introduce yourself.
I'm Catherine Gladwell, and I'm the founder and chief executive at Refugee Education UK, which supports refugee children to get into education and thrive once they're there. And I'm also a director at an education research organisation called Jigsaw.
Thank you. So I think, obviously, the topic of the session is very much around innovation and social entrepreneurship. And I think, obviously, having education as a core of it, so how can we give back? And I think we have been talking about innovation. We've been talking about digital. We've been talking about AI. And I'm looking at the new generation that I'm sure you're using ChatGPT, and I'm very, very jealous. I am still doing it. So how we can actually support that, and especially now we're living through very big changes when it comes to international aid. So we've seen the American aid being cut, which counts for probably, if I'm not mistaken, majority, more than half of the aid that's being distributed around the world. So what does that mean? A lot of people don't have access to food. A lot of people do not have access to vaccinations. A lot of people are more inclined to be affected by climate change. And then after the wave, obviously, we start seeing the British government, the French, the Germans, the Dutch starting to cut even more aid. So how do we make out of it? How do we make out of it? So I think we are talking a lot in British Expertise about the new wave of international development, how we should support people. And I think one of the things that comes quite a lot is innovation, how we bring more impact. I think we need to deal with the reality in the first place. There is a new wave of doing things. And probably I'm just going to ask for you, and especially because I know some of you are here experts, like what does an impactful technical assistant means to you? How we can make sure that $1 that we give to someone impacts the whole community, how we make sure that we changes the way of doing things. And obviously at the core stays the financial side. We still need to think about new vehicles of that, but then also we need to start thinking about how to leverage on research. And I think we're very, very lucky in the UK for the opportunity of having so many scholars, so many academia, so many great higher education institutions that can collaborate in that innovation space that sits at the core. So how do we actually impact how we use this research to bring it into the businesses and how we bring it to the people on the lowest cost possible. The other thing, what I was also thinking about is the entrepreneurship, and I think we need to be more entrepreneurship. We need to get out of the small bubble we're thinking about, to have the big picture, to think how we can leverage the most of what we have. I'm kind of like, we have had so many conversations this week with the Minister of International Development here in the UK, and it's sad to see that everyone wants to support, and especially with such a beautiful legacy of this country, into what we have been offering. And I think probably one of the most interesting thing is understanding that we cannot do it all, but understanding where we can be the best. And I think a very impactful comment that our government means is partnership. Being equal. And I think that's a very powerful message when it comes to working in different communities, understanding what they want. And actually, that is what I consider being one of the biggest impact. When you go into a community, you understand how people are, you understand their culture, not bringing what you think they need. So I think that's kind of like my 4 remarks in terms of the financials, using the research, entrepreneurship, and also leveraging the technology.
Thank you, Louisa. Okay, I'm going to come over here so that I can also use the slides. So, excellent. So hello, I'm Catherine, and I'm the founder and chief executive of an organisation called Refugee Education UK, and it's really wonderful to get the chance to be here with you guys today. Before I talk about what we do, I'm going to tell you about my morning before coming here. So I dropped my daughter off at school this morning. I don't know what it's like when you guys get dropped off at school, but I don't imagine it's quite like this because she's 8. But this is how it works for her. So there's this big gate and it's closed. And the kids all kind of crowd up to it in the morning, waiting for a teacher to come down and pull the gate open. They know that they're not allowed to run, and every morning they're reminded that they're not allowed to run. But the thing is that these kids actually love their school, and they all want to be the first one in the classroom. So each morning you have this kind of hilarious comedy scenario when you get this swarm of 5 to 11-year-olds power walking, definitely not running, kind of elbows out, just trying to be the first one in their classroom. And I absolutely love that image. And every time that I drop her off, it kind of fills my heart with a little bit of joy. Because actually, whatever our experiences of school have been, and maybe that hasn't been our experience, but when things are as they should be, and when school is as it should be, refugee children, or children in general, want to be there. And in fact, I would say that that is even more the case for refugee children and young people who've already experienced so much loss and disruption and grief. So whether they're 8 or 18, the refugee children that we work with want to be in school. Now, there it is, the school gate, firmly shut. But at Refugee Education UK, we do the work that we do because what we actually see for young refugees is lost learning because of the disruption and the conflicts that they've had to flee, long waits. It might surprise you to know that a 15-year-old refugee arriving in the UK will wait up to a year for a school place. We also see lower outcomes. So by GCSE level, refugee children and young people are on average 3 years behind their non-migrant peers. We also see limited progression. So as they progress through further education and higher education, and we've heard from some young people today already, and no doubt you guys are also starting to think about what is next for you. It gets harder and harder if you're coming from a forced migration background, with an estimated only 2.3% of young refugees applying for university in the UK, compared with 40% of 18-year-olds across the board. But we also do the work that we do because we know that things can be different. So what do we do? Well, I started Refugee Education UK over a decade ago now. I'd been a teacher and I'd seen how important education was. I had refugee children in my classes. And I had this little group of friends around a kitchen table. And we'd got to know a group of refugee children who were living on the same street that I was living on in Harlesden in northwest London. And from those conversations with those teenagers, with that little group of friends around a kitchen table in London with no money and no office, we thought something could be done differently in education in this country for young refugees. And our unexpected story of the last 12 years or so has been growing into a national charity where we now support between 2,000 and 3,000 refugee children and young people each year, along with about 500 education institutions. So what we do, firstly, education access. So making sure that up to 12-month wait reduces as much as possible, and that refugee children can get into school as fast as possible when they arrive, from primary school all the way up to university. Secondly, education thriving. So we know that getting that gate to open is just the first step. What happens when you're in school is just as important. So we have a whole nother range of frontline programs that look at academic outcomes and psychosocial well-being. That looks like academic mentoring, about 200 pairs across London and other cities, boosting academic outcomes, GCSE study clubs, homework drop-in centres, advice clinics, psychosocial learning activities, a whole range of things designed to make sure that children and young people who've experienced intense conflict can thrive. Finally, our third bit of work is education change. Because over the last 12 years, we've also learnt a few things about what needs to be different in the education system from the young people and the schools that we have worked with. So I loved the diagram that the lady from London Zoo showed us earlier about systemic change in her little chair of the 3 legs and needing all 3 of them to be able to move forward. So we know what needs to change, both at the frontline level, but also at the policy level and at the practice level in education institutions, schools, colleges and universities across the country. So together with our really amazing group of refugee youth advocates who've been through some of our programs, who've experienced what it's like to go through the British education system as a young refugee. We build research, we construct evidence, or construct evidence isn't really the right phrase, is it? That sounds a little bit fake somehow. So we build evidence based on the data that we have, the rich data that we have from our programs, and we meet with policy makers and decision makers, and making sure that the young refugees who've been affected by these issues are the ones to present the changes that they know need to happen. So what difference does it make? Well, 90% of the young refugees that we support improve their academic outcomes, and 85% experience documented better psychosocial well-being across a whole range of different metrics. And a girl called Mariam, who I had the pleasure of spending like a whole day with last week, is a really good example. So Mariam arrived in the UK from Afghanistan in September 2022 when she was 16, which was just after the Taliban took over Afghanistan. So she was housed in emergency accommodation with her family when she arrived here in the UK, and she met one of our Access project workers at a workshop in her temporary accommodation. And at that point, she had just been told that because she was a refugee, she wasn't eligible to go to college, to further education college. So our team challenged that refusal and managed to get her a place studying health and social care. She then got matched with one of our volunteer academic mentors who met with her every single week for about 18 months and got support in understanding how to navigate her own social and emotional well-being and build her resilience from our psychosocial support team. She's now being supported to apply for university by our Access to Higher Education team, has completed our youth leadership programme and wants to become a nurse. And she's just about to join our group of young advocates to use her experience to advocate for younger refugee children who are coming up behind her. But we really want to see that type of outcome for all refugee children, not just the ones that we're able to support. So just last week, maybe the week before last, together with that group of refugee youth advocates, we launched our vision for refugee children's education in the UK in Parliament, in the House of Commons, like outlining the key and concrete policy changes that need to happen so that we can have an education system where all refugee children can thrive. someone asked me before that event, like, so what? So what do we get if we make those changes? Without unpicking what was behind that question, which is, can be deconstructed in a lot of ways, it wasn't particularly helpful. But happily, there is a really good answer to that question, whatever the position someone who's asking it is coming from. And the answer is that if we make these changes, we get more young people thriving, like Mariam, who I just told you about. And that really is what our vision for refugee children's education in this country is. It's a vision where, in spite of trauma, grief, loss, huge dislocation from one place to another, that every child is able to flourish, and every child feels valued, supported, and included, and where every child has the opportunity to build a more hopeful future. We were talking a little bit about our values earlier, and I got asked what was my top value, and I said that it was hope. And ultimately, I guess I had the privileged position of being able to be involved in setting our values as an organisation. So a foundation of hope is our core value. But it's because we believe that when we invest in education, we're sending a really powerful message of hope, that there is a future, and that it's a future worth investing in and worth preparing for. So it has been and continues to be one of the greatest joys. Rasha talked about joy, and I think we can find joy in the work that we do. It's been one of the greatest joys and privileges of my life so far, that I've got to know and learn from so many kind, ambitious, gifted, talented, resilient, determined young refugees. And it's really lovely to be able to be here and share a little bit of why that matters, and why, as we're all going about our daily lives, we should be thinking not just about ourselves and the story that we've had, but the story that the person who might be sitting next to us has had, the barriers that they might face that you might not be facing today, and what we can all do together to move forward more hopefully in that. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Yeah. I'm not sure how we are going to do this.
Thank you. I was just wondering, my name's Amelie, if you, Catherine, could say a little bit more about the kinds of organisations that you work with, like partners, whether you work with mostly UK organisations or also international ones, and whether you see that changing over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Thank you.
Thank you. I might answer that in two parts, UK and international. At the moment, most of our frontline work is in the UK, but a lot of our evidence building and research work it spans multiple countries. So in the UK, our partners are local authorities, so unaccompanied refugee and asylum seeking children. If they arrive in the country aged 15 or younger, they will be given a foster or put with a foster family. If they arrive aged 16 or 17, then they will still be in the care of the local authority, but they won't have a foster family, and they will live in kind of group houses. It's called multi-occupancy accommodation, but group houses where you might have sort of 4 to 6 teenagers living together, visited by a social worker, but no adult actually living there. So you can imagine the challenges that brings. But local authorities, schools, colleges, universities, other charities, like British Red Cross would be a good example, who does sort of a lot of youth work. But we will go in and provide sort of specific refugee education related expertise. Education organisations like Inter-University, thinking of names that people might be familiar with. So a whole range. We also work with government departments in the UK when we're thinking about the policy piece. We also work with universities in a sort of different way. So half of our work with education institutions is about what can they do practically to make it easier for refugee and asylum seeking children and young people to get in and then thrive there. with universities, we also have a whole separate strand of actual evidence building and research and policy work as well. Internationally, which isn't our frontline work, but in terms of evidence building, we've had quite a few partnerships with different UN agencies, so UNHCR and UNICEF, which have typically been research, and particularly looking at how young refugees can carry out that research themselves. So we developed a university-accredited social sciences research study program that was, I think 30 young refugees in Pakistan and Rwanda completed over the last few years, and then they've now been working on various different research projects with us, with UNHCR and with Jigsaw, the other organisation that I mentioned. How I see that changing over the next 4 to 5 years, it's such a challenging question. I think, on the one hand, with the funding cuts that Louisa was talking about, we're already seeing that for a lot of people, building evidence is becoming something that has been, it's essential, but at the same time, it's increasingly being considered a luxury, and that might have to be the thing that goes. However, in the face of that, we are still seeing a lot of organisations who are saying actually participation in research is critically important to us, and we would like to work with you to explore how young refugees who are themselves affected by these issues can be the ones that are generating the evidence and then presenting it to decision makers. And a lot of the work that we're doing in that international space is in that type of area. So that feasibly could grow. But yeah, thank you for the question.
I do have a question. How do you engage with the emotional side, the trauma that the children are experiencing? Because obviously, as you mentioned in your presentation, it's very, very tough for them to continue studying at the same level with the other children, just because the trauma they're going, the displacement. So I'm just curious how you are dealing, what specifically you guys are doing around that.
Yeah, thank you. It's a really, really good question. I think I'll maybe just say a tiny little bit about how we see that, and then what we do. When it comes to education specifically, I think we see it in a few key ways. Firstly, we see it where the experiences that children have been through mean that it's just really difficult for them to cope in the classroom environment at all. And so we have children who want to be in education, but we've then actually had children who they're in the classroom, but they will hide under the table because it's just too much to be in that environment, or any small noise will trigger something that has happened in the past. And so then we see children sort of withdrawing and saying, I can't go to school anymore, or parents saying, I just can't, they're just not ready, I can't send them. We also, though, see schools excluding young refugees and asylum seekers, and that's typically when trauma is manifesting in things that are interpreted as behavioural challenges. So a lot of the young people that we work with struggle with insomnia and nightmares, and so perhaps don't get to sleep until 5 a.m. And then are expected to be at school by 8:30 in the morning. And so we often have schools saying, I've got persistent lateness, repeat absence, not concentrating in class, overreacting or being aggressive to another child, or just things, but they're not necessarily looking behind that to say, well, what's the cause of this and why is this happening? What can we do about it? So we, I guess, do two things. So we have a training program for schools, which is in supporting refugee children in the classroom. I keep saying schools. It's sort of from primary all the way up to university. So we modify it for the different level of education, which equips teachers to know what can they do to make that viable. How can they help in that moment? What are the networks out there that they can refer to? And then we have our own sort of social and emotional learning materials where we support young people to sort of actually build their own resilience, to map their sort of capability networks, to improve sleep hygiene really practically. So a whole range.
Very beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you. Any other questions?
Thank you. I was curious, so I've just completed an evaluation of the virtual schools model, which supports children looked after, and through that have become quite aware of, I suppose, best practice areas throughout Wales where you really see, I guess I'm seeing similar challenges, right, for the children in those circumstances. So, trauma background and seeing kind of trauma-informed trainings and interventions and how powerful they can be. And I was just wondering whether you had any particular examples from local authorities or your partners across the UK, which were like best practice examples or kind of good standard examples of areas that have been really welcoming for children in these situations.
Thank you. And also, I'd really love to talk to you later because we're in the very, very early stages of a potential education policy related project that includes Wales. In terms of best practice, I think what you said about seeing pockets of best practice is so poignant, because one of the things that we see, you often hear the kind of postcode lottery referred to in terms of healthcare in this country, but it also applies to education, and particularly if you're a child in care, then the particular local authority that you're with, it can change everything. And we've worked with social workers and virtual schools that are utterly incredible and just go above and beyond, and others at the other end of the spectrum. But one example of good practice, like concretely, that I would give would be Oxfordshire, where they have taken quite a creative approach to the funding that they do get. So every local authority has to, decide how are they going to spend the funding that they have for looked after children. And I mentioned that one of the key challenges that refugee children face are the long waits for schools. So there are things that can be done at a policy level to reduce the wait, but the reality at the moment is that large numbers of children are still waiting. So what Oxfordshire has done is they've pooled the funding that they've got that's restricted to education for looked after children, and instead of spending it on I don't know if they were specifically doing this, but some local authorities do, spending it on like 1 hour a week of private English language tuition for a child. They've pooled it, and they have in this case, they've contracted us. They could have contracted somebody else, but they contracted us to run an immediate intensive interim provision for unaccompanied asylum-seeking children under 18 who are waiting for school places. So it means that a child can arrive in the UK on Monday, and instead of having a sort of 9-month wait, they can start our classes on a Tuesday, and it's a 4-week program, because we like to think that in that 4 weeks, as well as giving them intensive language and other sort of education and cultural orientation input, we can also speed up the length of time that it takes for them to get a place in school or college, so that they, after 4 weeks, can go on somewhere else. But it's also a rolling program, so people can repeat it if they need to. And I would love to see more local authorities doing that. Doesn't have to be with us. There are like plenty of other people who can also provide that type of support. The important thing is that it actually happens.
I would just like to know, in terms of these refugee children, do you also support them in terms of finding their personal identities in the society that they live, and of course in the classrooms, in the universities, because I think that also plays a very important role for them to feel accepted and settled. Yeah, I have applied for funding, so I am also a lecturer and a researcher, and I've applied for funding in terms of professional refugees, sort of, but professional accountants migrating from Hong Kong into the UK. So we have the global north, the global south, and how are they finding their identities, their experiences, how are the policymakers or the accounting bodies supporting them. So just because of the children here, that they get an idea, how do they find their personal identities and what support do they receive? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's a really beautiful question. Thank you. I'll pick maybe one thing that we do. So one thing that we have tried to do as an organisation, though, is to say what are we expert in and what are we not expert in, and to limit ourselves to that. So there was a time, this isn't this isn't exactly what you're referring to, but there was a time when we were getting a lot of requests for support with housing, with immigration, with things that were like, oh, we don't have the expertise, and nor do we have the capacity. So we're trying to be quite boundaried in education. But one of the things that I most love about education is that when you take a holistic view of it, it can absolutely include the type of thing that you were talking about. And our hope as a team, and this is the way we sort of like train our team to be, is that experience that you're talking about is sort of embedded in all of our activities and in all of the programs that we do. So maybe two tiny examples. One would be in our academic mentoring program, where we will train all of our volunteer academic mentors also in psychosocial support, in social and emotional learning, in mental health first aid, in active listening, and just making sure that they are in a space to, yes, help with that immediate education need that the young person's prioritizing, but they're also there to just provide a broader sense of welcome and community, and you are wanted here. A lot of the young people that we work with, a volunteer is a new word for them, and I sometimes said that if I had like £1 for every time that a young person said, well, what does volunteer mean? I wouldn't need to write any more funding applications. But it's really beautiful though, because when you explain that word, we often have young people saying things like, oh, okay, so my teacher is their job to support me, my social worker is their job to support me, but like this person is meeting up with me every week to support me with my education because they want to. And given the kind of quite hostile narratives around immigration and refugees at the moment, like even that in itself is quite powerful. And then the second example would be that we run a refugee youth leadership course, which obviously is like a small proportion of the young people that we work with. It's like each cohort is only 15 because it's quite intensive. But that's where I think some of that more like deeper work around like values and purpose and how do you see yourself as a leader and where do you fit in this place and all of that type of thing comes out. So thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry to interrupt, but I think we have a design thinking workshop for the students.
Wonderful.
But yeah,
We will close. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone.